Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to our LinkedIn live session. Today, you'll see I'm not on my own. I'm joined by an incredible guest, which I'm really excited to introduce to you shortly. And today, we are going to be talking about unleashing potential, harnessing data and stories to empower workplace success. As always, please use this as an opportunity to connect with each other, write comments, questions, anything that you want us to answer. But I'm really delighted that you've joined us today here at Talent Included, because we want to explore the transformative potential of how we can use data and storytelling to drive meaningful change and impact for more inclusive workplaces. Now, I spend my days connecting and speaking to D&I professionals all over the world. And you won't be surprised to hear that the majority face the same challenges in their roles. So I wanted to use this platform and today's conversation to highlight and showcase successful and impactful strategies that we can really help to drive tangible outcomes. But for our first session, I'm really, really delighted to be joined by our special guest, the none other than Sathya Bala, who is a founder and CEO of True Change and My Skin, My Story. And her journey itself, which we're going to talk about today, is testament to resilience, discovery, a deep commitment to diversity and inclusion. And through her work, she's really been able to demonstrate how to use the power of data to illuminate, if you like, the hidden patterns and drive impactful decisions, to also really emphasize the importance of using personal stories. So her captivating way that she engages with the audiences and really humanize complex topics has led me to bring her to you today. And I also want to say a huge and happy birthday to you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here, Sally, and it's going to be a great conversation.
It's going to be a great conversation. And, you know, your passion for empowering women, I think, is something that we really connect at a deep level on, particularly women of colour, which really led you to create your My Skin, My Story, which has recently celebrated its 4th birthday. So huge congratulations. As a fellow female founder myself, I appreciate how much work and energy goes into building something from the bottom up. And also True Change, the business that you're a CEO and founder of, really reflects your kind of personal mission for equity for all. And I'm sure lots of you have seen Sathya speak before, and you're speaking kind of capabilities and ways to engage audiences. And I really hope, I appreciate we've only got about half an hour with each other today. I think you've got some amazing plans for your birthday, but I really hope we're also going to get the opportunity to talk about your Invest in Her empowerment program. So probably enough from me. Please, over to you. Can you please introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your story, and really what brought you into the world of D&I?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Sally, so much for having me. So I'm Sathya Bala. My pronouns are she, her. And really kind of where I've ended up today is very much a combination of a personal and professional journey, to be honest. Like the personal and professional have really intersected and led me to where I am now. I think for both of us, the work we do now is very purpose driven. My main thing is I run True Change, which is a business focused on helping organizations and industry groups drive inclusive change using the power of data and stories. And so I've been running that business now nearly for 3 years. As you mentioned, it's kind of that, I talk about it as the Venn diagram of diversity, equity, inclusion, data, and stories. And that is a Venn diagram of the business, but it's also a Venn diagram of me. And part of the way of getting there was before I started my business, I was the head of data governance globally at Chanel. That was kind of coming to kind of a peak in my corporate journey, which was where I spent really most of my career, working in large organizations. I talk about my career being a series of plans and accidents, but when I ended up at Chanel heading up data governance, I had already decided kind of, when I was in the interview process in 2019, I had kind of been succeeding against the odds in most of my career. Because to be honest, someone like me, it wasn't someone that you would think of as working as a senior leader at Chanel, reporting into the CFO, even, the type of person that would be invited to an interview with that organization. I think part of that was, I'm sure even I internalized some of those feelings. But I guess most of my career was succeeding against the odds and being kind of the one to kind of occupy spaces where I was quite different and I was maybe a new voice and definitely an underrepresented voice, but someone that got to a place where I realized me having been in the room and no one else looking like me was even more of a reason why I should be there and open the door for other people, not just other people that are like me, but just that curiosity and that awareness deeply that I had in me personally, that there were so many other people that were othered in ways that were different to myself. So yeah, when I was at Chanel, I kind of put my hand up and I was like, in the interview, I want to be a sponsor for diversity, equity, and inclusion. My boss was like, great. And it was a really interesting time of me being able to use my skills, which was working in data governance, supporting business stakeholders and supporting big strategic projects on how they design data into those projects and use that data and make sure there's quality around it and that that data is owned by the business, not something that people think lives in a basement in an IT department's domain, and is data that is used to inform decision making. So to be honest, diversity, equity, inclusion just became a new context in which I was using, I guess, my professional skills, right? Which is, okay, we look at how we use data to make sustainability better, to make customer management and marketing better. So we also need to look at how we do that with diversity, equity, inclusion. And I guess I was the one to put my hand up because I suddenly discovered that diversity, equity, inclusion was this thing that existed that would be a vehicle to make things better for other people, to make a fairer world, a more inclusive world. So, I mean, it's a very long story and I'm sure we'll get into it, but it was a combination of actually finding a way that my actual skills played into diversity, equity, inclusion so we could drive real sustainable change. It's not about talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. Data helps us actually drive it through change, through accountability, transparency, measurement. But it's also a personal passion of mine. I'd always been that person speaking up, you know, in a constructive way in teams. I was always the one kind of, you know, I started in audit. So it's kind of ingrained in me to kind of put my hand up when I think things could be done better. And I also really championed people coming up that were perhaps not represented at senior levels. And I guess me ending up running my business was an adventure I hadn't planned, but it was that combination of realizing my data skills were actually so critically needed in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, figuring out that diversity, equity, inclusion even existed. That was me just reading and like following cool people on LinkedIn. And that was a discovery only made in 2019. And then, as you said, in my own personal time, I started to run a community called My Skin, My Story, because I just had so many women of color in my life who were my personal friends and cheerleaders. And I didn't understand why we weren't spotlighted and celebrated in mainstream spaces. So I wanted to create a space for that. So after a while, 18 months at Chanel, I was doing all this extra diversity, equity, inclusion stuff on top of my day job. I was running monthly events for My Skin, My Story, which focuses on women of color, but also brings allies on the way. And I was starting to speak at like data events, inclusion events, because I became kind of an accidental voice on how to make the data world more inclusive, how to use data to drive inclusion more generally, and also talking about community building, safe spaces, psychological safety from my work with My Skin, My Story. So I followed the path, and the path ended up with, I had to do this for real with my business.
That's incredible. And I think, like so many, there are so many different routes into diversity and inclusion. And it's almost, you know, I describe my own experience like an awakening. Like it's almost once you see what's, once you say open Pandora's box, but you can't then unsee what, the inequalities that exist in the workplace, inequities, and, wanting to be a force for positive change, I think is, it's motivating for us as individuals, but also when you say you became an accidental voice, I don't think there's anything accidental about this. I think you are absolutely exactly where you needed to be, because I think what a lot of organizations, and we work with organizations from different stages of their diversity journey, and I think the data hurdle is one that if you're at the beginning of your journey, you really have to overcome. You really kind of have to kind of make that commitment. And I'm interested to hear about your experience at Chanel and your passion for diversity and inclusion. Had they at that point not ever collected or analysed any data then when it came to diversity and inclusion? And were you kind of really spearheading that as a project internally?
Yeah, so I think, if we rewind the clock to 2020, so it was really interesting timing. I started a new role 2 weeks before the lockdown started in London, which is where I'm based. And actually, it was beyond just my own organization. I think because I am a natural connector and collaborator, I had already built huge relationships with just other peers, back when I was in my audit and risk roles, but then also when I was in data. Also, because I started at Deloitte, I knew a lot of people in Big Four. And usually, if you're going to be consulting and advising clients on topics, you need to know what you're doing, right? So I was pulling off all of those relationships, not just trying to figure out, right, how do we do this at Chanel, but actually learning from what other organizations are doing. And I think what was really interesting and apparent in 2020, this was the case at Chanel, but this was also the case for a lot of organizations I was talking to, was we have bits and pieces of data that we've always collected in organizations around our people, right? But actually, how specific that data is and why we're collecting it and how we're using it, which, by the way, is like very key questions when you're a data person, that wasn't necessarily there, right? So everyone started going through a huge exercise of saying, actually, beyond things like gender and age and nationality, what do we want to collect about our colleagues and our employees? And then how do we want to understand more qualitative data of not just what our workforce looks like, but how do they feel? And are these sentiments around how transparent the organization is, how fair it is, how progression works, how pay equity works, does that differ between groups? And then also, how does data that we've always had around the employee life cycle, for example, what does it look like if we start to look at it with a diversity lens? Just like we've always had data around procurement and suppliers, but maybe we never ask the question, what does our supplier base look like when we have an equity lens on, well, who's the owner of that supplier? And actually, are we really skewed to certain businesses? And so by supporting not just our own employees, it's also about how we support our customers and our suppliers as well. So I actually think everyone was in a state of, we have some data, but we've never quite thought about how we use data to look at existing processes from an inclusion and diversity lens. Because I'm really passionate about, this is not an add-on thing. We need to look at all of our core processes and the things that we do and how we serve our customers as organizations. We need to build diversity, equity, inclusion into that. You can't take the auditor out of the girl. If you're familiar with audit or not, it's all about going in, looking at a process, seeing where it works, where it doesn't, and then you have to introduce controls and checkpoints to make sure the right things happen. The same goes for diversity, equity, inclusion. But one interesting thing that I did do, and again, I think that was pushing me down this path of where I've ended up now running my own business, advising very much on these things of not just companies at the start of their journey, but even middle of the way through or super mature. It's not just what data do we have and how do we use it. It's actually, how do we use this data to inform decisions and make sure we make fairer decisions around things like promotions, supplier selection, what customers we're targeting about products. So I think even the most mature organizations are all looking at, we have some data, but how do we really use it to drive impact for our people who work for us, for our suppliers and our customers. But the last thing I'd say is, what got me into this whole thing was I started a community, a professional network called Data Meets DEI. I still run that today. And I did that while I was at Chanel, because me and the head of diversity and inclusion, we were talking about this. And we were just like, surely we can learn from other people's progress, but also mistakes. Like, what's the point of all of us facing the same hurdles and not learning from each other? So it's been really great. It's nearly been 4 years, but I've been running this professional network called Data Meets DEI, and we're a bunch of organizations that work in diversity, equity, inclusion. We also have some people from like people analytics and data privacy in organizations, and we basically meet every couple of months and we share on key themes like, what are we doing with disability reporting across the world? How do we manage different jurisdictions? What are the examples where we've used data to actually drive behavioral change or change in our hiring process? So that's kind of, I think my answer with this is, the more I talk to organizations through the forum I run, but also with my clients, the more I realize that we might be at different levels of maturity, but the data question hasn't gone away yet.
It hasn't gone away, and nor is it going to go away, because I think as organizations, we use data to drive so many of our decisions. It's only, you're right in saying that we have to integrate inclusion in the conversation. It has to be holistic. And I speak to different organizations, different people. You'll be interested to see the reporting line of the D&I lead and where that sits within organizations. But my personal view is it has to be holistic. It has to go straight up to the C-suite, not necessarily the CPO. I think sometimes it's seen as an HR initiative, as actually where it really should be holistic. It should have a touch point in every single department within the organization. But I know data is your kind of, your foundation, your history. But I think what I'd love to bring to the listeners' attention and highlight today is using that with storytelling and what impact storytelling has on using the data to drive business decisions. And just quickly, sorry, before you answer that, so I'm really interested to hear what you say. I think it's really important to mention, again, regardless of where you are in your D&I journey, it is a change program. It's a change program. And so organizations going into it sometimes can feel quite overwhelmed, regardless of where they are on their journey, because there's always work to do. But if you were to take the inclusion piece out and see it as just a strategic change program that you have to take your business through in order to remain current and to be engaged with all the stakeholders that have got an opinion on diversity and inclusion, I think sometimes it takes some of the emotion out of it, and actually we just need to get down to business. Sorry, yes. Getting on my soapbox, but talk to me about where empowerment comes into this for you, and how we can use that in itself as a superpower.
Yeah. So I think, for me, data and stories are kind of two sides of the same coin. And I completely agree with you. What we're talking about here is change work. That's why the name of my business means True Change. I mean, a little segue, the word true is actually a nod to my name, because my name means truth or ultimate truth. Now, let's be real. I have been a good liar my whole life. I was the only child growing up in an ethnic immigrant family. I choose to interpret my namesake as maybe being more of a truth teller necessarily than always telling the truth. But yeah, I was really intentional with my business name as well. Like, True is, it's a nod to my name, my heritage, my background. There's a story there, but also it's about not paying lip service to these things. And I think we can look at data and forget the human aspect behind it. but we also forget this is sustainable long-term change. And that's kind of what I mean by true. And that change piece is kind of a nod to the fact that this work is change work, but also the fact that I kind of have been, again, one of those people that's maybe an exception to the rule in that I quite enjoy change, and I gravitate to that work. So I guess, back to your question, data is really a tool that helps organizations. Let's be honest, we all have massive to-do lists. Work and organizations are getting more and more complicated and volatile. Problem solving is a critical thing, and data no longer is something we can ignore because it really helps us address problems. So we should always look at data as a tool that's about driving business change. Just like diversity, equity, inclusion is not about philanthropy or even doing the right thing. Essentially, it's about saying it would make no business sense for us to not run diverse, inclusive, and equitable organizations. For example, when everyone talks about how hard it is to find talent, why would we consciously avoid and continue repeating patterns where we know we're not reaching all the talent that's in the pool? Why? That would make no sense. Or when we know, I love data, there's been some great research by the media company WPP. They did work on kind of population projections of ethnic minority communities in the UK. It's something like 60 trillion pounds of spend potential growth is going to happen in those communities in the next 40 years. Again, it would make it would almost be ridiculous business to not think we need to serve these diverse growing communities and have a workforce that understands those communities and reflects them, right? Yeah. But, as you said, this is change work, and change takes time. And we're humans, and we don't always do things because it logically makes sense. There are competing priorities. So it's about how we get buy-in and we believe in the change. And so to me, that's where the story element is crucial. It's about gaining that emotional buy-in, that mental buy-in, and that commitment to actually stick to change, even when there are ups and downs, even when there's an election that might be distracting us, or an economy that is getting tougher. So it's easier to shave off things that we could think of as less priority, like diversity, equity, inclusion. You need that buy-in. So to me, data is about pinpointing where are the real issues and not relying on guesswork and anecdotes, having a way to build trust and transparency of where are we actually, where do we want to go? And with any change, we need to have a baseline of today, an idea of where we're going, and measure our progress. But the stories is about saying each of those data points is a human, right? And there is a story there. Just like if we're trying to address female talent in leadership, we can look at the data, but how do we come up with solutions that work if we don't listen to the stories of women, as an example, or the stories of people of color, disabled people? I love this phrase, no solutions for us without us. And to me, that is where stories and listening to people is super important. It's not about putting the burden and the work on underrepresented groups that are already time poor, lack access and opportunities, but it's about getting the people with power and influence to bankroll and invest in those solutions, but understand and design those solutions with the people who understand the issue and know intimately what they need and their communities need to succeed. And so for me, my story is just as important as my skill set. I am a Sri Lankan Tamil woman. I was born in Singapore. I have never lived in my own mother country. I grew up in Sydney, Australia from the age of 3. And then I moved to London when I was 22, like many Australians. I apologize for our slight domination in certain suburbs. But you know what? We're great. I don't apologize. And I've been a long-time Londoner for the last 16 years. And my sense of identity and how I bring that to work has been an evolution. I was conditioned in my early years at school, in communities, at university, and early in my career. I was conditioned to check all of that stuff at the door. But what I realized is my ability to communicate and navigate people from different parts of the world, different cultures, that ties directly to the fact that as a kid, I felt like I didn't belong in the East or the West, that I was not a good brown girl, but I also didn't fit the mold of what was a default white Australian. But actually, it wasn't that I didn't fit in either. It was that I navigated both. I have a sensitivity to multiple cultures. And I'm not one of those people that can't engage on those topics because I'm curious and I have experience. So is that not the type of voices that we need when we then talk about how do we become culturally sensitive in global organizations, right? That's why voices like mine are super important to actually normalize having speaking at events and framing solutions when actually people like me historically weren't always in the rooms where those solutions were being designed. The last thing I would say is, on that empowerment piece is, imagine if, and I think we've all been there, where there's very well-meaning initiatives that are designed and created, but the people that you're trying to help are not involved. I heard of this really interesting story, like a massive charity, NGO, nonprofit, was working with a local community somewhere in South Asia, perhaps in India, and they're trying to help women be able to have more facilities to cook food in their homes because they had very limited facilities. And they had come up with some kind of portable oven, but it didn't work because the fumes were so there were various reasons where it didn't work, and all these women basically didn't use it. And when you went and spoke directly to the women, they were like, actually, if you just gave us this much simpler thing, we would be fine. Yeah. And they had to learn that the hard way, right? So I think empowerment is about including the people that we're trying to empower in the solution. And that's 100% what I've done with the Invest in Her program, which is a flagship program I want to talk about.
Well, do you know what? I'm so glad. I'm thinking we really must talk about the Invest in Her because, when I started making my move into diversity and inclusion, it came from a place of recruiting at a very senior level within the finance and accountancy world. So I think in a prior world, our paths might have even crossed because, I used to recruit in and out of the Big Four. But it was when they came to me and said, look, we're now at the senior level, we want a gender balanced shortlist. That's what made me retrain as a career coach because I saw the impact it was having on female careers and females at work. So, and ran something very similar myself, but I really want to, that is very much to one side now. It's in my past. So I'd love to talk about your program, who it's designed for. And I think importantly, how people can get involved.
Yeah. So basically I've taken all the things that I've personally learnt, but also I have run empowerment programs now through my business within organizations. So I did a massive women's empowerment program for Costain, a construction company. I'm still part of the Barclays Launchpad program, delivering empowerment masterclasses for their cohort, which is focused on women and people of color in middle management levels, and all the stuff from running My Skin, My Story and running empowerment sessions for that community. So what I've done is, let's be honest, there are so many programs out there, but I'm really focused on how do we make sure we're investing in women and we're not trying to fix women. So this program takes all the best bits. It's a virtual women's empowerment program. It starts in September. And the program is completely designed to unlock women's potential and equip them for success in their careers, but on their own terms. This is not about us telling them, actually, for success for you is to have a straight direction up to have the most senior role in an organization. Mm-hmm. Actually, success to you might be a balance of work life and personal life and commitments, but that doesn't mean you don't want to still be impactful in your day-to-day job. So this is really about equipping women and not fixing women. So this is about investing in women to kind of demystify career skills many are rarely taught. So I don't know about you, Sally, but I got to where I was in my career by learning things the hard way. I didn't really know, and I wasn't often mentored or supported. I didn't have a lot of role models close to me that could tell me about the importance of how to network and how to be visible with decision makers, how to articulate and communicate my strengths and actually tell people what I was good at or what I wanted. I thought, oh no, I should be humble and people will just realize. I didn't know how to communicate not just what I was good at, but the value I brought to an organization. I didn't know how to have a healthy relationship with personal brand that did not feel transactional and weird, but actually played on my uniqueness being my superpower. All this stuff are things that a lot of people, if they don't have access to people who've been there and succeeded in organizations and who are good at those skills, we don't know half the rules of how to navigate work and our careers. So this program, it starts in September. It's fully virtual. There's 4 master classes. We equip women through powerful stories, super practical resources, because I'm really into that practical stuff. And it's also about peer coaching and building a network outside of your organization. It's great that we have these initiatives within organizations, but one of the biggest gender gaps with women is our network gap. And I'm sure you've heard this phrase, your network is your net worth. And so building those expansive networks and those meaningful relationships outside our own organization is also super important. So I'll share details. I'll comment a link on that program. It's for mid to senior women in any field. And it's for women who want to improve their confidence in skills like networking, knowing their strengths, communicating their value, advocating for themselves and asking for what they want, owning their voice and being an authentic cheerleader for others.
I love that. I'm like, sign me up. And I think it is really important. I really resonate with, just keeping your head down, and I don't know whether that's a generational thing for our generation, but it's like, you've got a good job, just keep your head down, kind of keep going. I think what I've seen out there on the market is programs that teach you how to be more man, more masculine, how to really, and I think, we've been through similar journeys in terms of actually we just need to create the space, which we don't do individually. And what I love about kind of group coaching environments is you're creating the space to really re-identify with who you are. What is it that you stand for? What is it that you really want out of your career? I ran something similar in just post-COVID, and it was all kind of, really identifying what your skills are. We never take the time to sit there and think, what is it that I'm really good at? What is it that, if I was to be put in a room with someone new, what would I say about me? And I think because of that, because we haven't given ourselves the space to identify what those things are, it completely puts us off putting ourselves out there and creating networks. And I think there is such a power in community just sign up for that alone, just the community, the opportunity to practice these skills with someone else. So there's no judgment. Everyone's in the same boat. It's giving me the feels. I'm loving it. Thank you so much for your time. There's one last thing I wanted to mention, which is you've got or ask you about, which is on the 7th of August, I know you've got a couple of lives coming up. So for anyone on my profile, please follow Sathya and obviously please vice versa. But you've got a talk coming up on the 7th of August with D&I Leaders, who is, a community and a network I'm really proud to be part of and love the energy and the impact that they have. So tell me about the 7th of August, what's happening?
So it's a free live webinar for D&I Leaders, that network run by Mark. If you know him, he's fabulous. Shout out to Mark. But it's actually open for anyone to join. So you can look that up. It's on the 7th of August and it's about empowering our people. And I'm actually going to be doing that together with an awesome woman who heads up diversity, equity, and inclusion globally for Hogarth, which is a big media agency within the WPP family. And we're going to be talking about the various programs we've run. She'll talk about a great program they've run within their organization, and I'll be sharing a bit from my perspective. But we'll be talking about how we really address inequities for people. And as you say, it's about equipping people with the skills and the support they need, and kind of what we've learned from the practical process of empowering people through these initiatives. So 7th of August, check it out. Free for anyone to to watch, and you can always watch it on demand if you miss it live.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I've gained so much out of this last half an hour. I'm really thankful and grateful for your time, especially on your birthday. I really hope everyone watching has, you know, taken away tangible things that we can really help to drive this business change, regardless of the subject, that we all, you know, we all need. But, you know, we're here. I've not met one diversity and inclusion practitioner or enthusiast who isn't backed by social impact. So thank you for bringing us your story and your expertise. I genuinely hope it's helped. And yeah, wish you a lovely birthday. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.